So you have a thing or two to say, right, before we open this up to a Q&A?
Well, no, I mean, I'm more curious. I'm always very curious to get a reaction, and to get a sense of the reaction. I hope you enjoyed the film. I hope it was it gave some form of clarity to what was a very complex event, a series of events. And I think, yeah, as part of the Q&A, we also have here tonight Ben Stark, who did an incredible job of cutting the film. And can we bring Ben down?
Ben Stark won the editing award at the Sundance Film Festival. He wasn't there in Utah to receive his award. He got it tonight, finally, so let's all give a big round of applause for Ben. You want to come down, Ben? Film was pretty beautifully edited, as you saw. So if anyone has any questions for Nick or Ben, raise your hand, and yeah, sure, the gentleman here.
Can I ask, were you inspired by John Krakauer's book on Everest in '96, Into Thin Air, I think it is?
No, sorry, the question was I inspired by John Krakauer's book? I'm familiar with it, I'd never read it. Prior to October 2008, I knew nothing about mountains. I didn't even know where, I mean, realistically speaking, where I thought K2 was that trick question one where it was is the one that's in Hawaii that's half underwater and half above. That's an interesting thing. I genuinely didn't. I have no background in mountain fiction, or I've come to appreciate things like The White Spider. I still never read any of those books, but I know there is a huge legacy of climbing and mountaineering. But I purposely avoid any source material as much as possible when doing other films, so that it hopefully doesn't become a comparison to something else.
If yeah, just try to do us a favor and speak as loudly as you can.
What brought you to this story? Why did you want to tell it?
Yeah, what brought me to this story and why I want to tell it? Basically, a friend of Ger McDonnell. The fact that Ger is Irish and I'm Irish has got very little to do with the actual how this film came about, because ostensibly we were making a film. Very soon after the incident, about 6 weeks afterwards, in fact, not even 6 weeks, 5 weeks afterwards, there was a friend of Ger's had met a business partner of mine and had told him the story, and it was a fascinating story. But the story at that point was how what he was talking about was how the Westerners were getting all the attention, but nobody had focused any attention on what Pemba had done to do so much to save lives on the mountain on that day, and so it was an attempt to address that. But by the time I got to interview Pemba in November of 2010, or 2008, it's that long ago, that imbalance had been readdressed, and so it wasn't about that. But when I interviewed him, he told us, and he showed us the pictures that he had on the camera that he'd taken from Ger, and all of a sudden it became very apparent that there was more to the story than meets the eye. So it was for very, very different reasons than the way the film. Look, a documentary, it's a lot of people say it's made in the editing suite in one way, and it is, but it's also was a process of, I just thought it was a fascinating story. As a director, I was drawn to that statistic of, for every 4 people who've ever stood on the summit, 1 has died getting there. That is just a ludicrous statistic, and to me, I've always been a huge fan of human exploration. I don't criticize them for doing that, because it's man, it's humankind's need and desire to explore and to do things that to push boundaries. So I didn't question that. I just wanted to know why, though.
Nick, were you a climber?
Me?
No, sorry, Ben. I mean, you weren't either.
Not at all. Maybe the climbing frame, maybe.
I've done a bit.
No, I'd be a crap climber as well.
Anyone out here? Sure, the gentleman back there.
Was there anything in the edit where you thought, actually, you need to go and film something else to guys film, or was it all planned beforehand and then you went into the edit and it was all there?
Did you all hear that?
No.
Do you want me to speak up? Sorry.
Yeah, a little bit, actually, yeah.
Sorry about that. When you got into the edit suite, was it all there ready for you to put to go, or did you have to say, hang on a minute, we're missing something, we need to go back out, refilm something?
I don't think edits complicated narratives. You ever feel that you have everything, and then the more you work at, the less, hopefully, the less you feel like you need to go out and get anything else. I don't think we went out and got very much.
I mean, not external for. I mean, the only thing at one point we did go back and do a second set of interviews with Jer's family, and it was his mum and his sisters, and well, there was always that every time you turn around, somebody said, "Well, actually, I found this," and it was like, "Oh, wow, somebody else had something." So, other than that, I mean, from in terms of the actual physical climbing and on the mountain stuff, no, but it was more to do with how do we try and explain the nature of people on the mountain. And obviously, because Jer wasn't present as a voice, except in that wonderful radio, anytime you hear his voice, he did an incredible radio interview about 6-7 months before he was killed. And, I think that's, but we needed something, and he needed a voice from, and the family were to be able to provide that, basically,
I'm sure this lady down here.
I'm not clear as to how much material did you film yourself, or how much was actually.
The question was, it wasn't clear to her how much material Nick shot himself, that this film shot, or how much of it was already there, or how much is recreations.
Yeah, we're going through their percentages. About 45% of it's archive, and only about 20%, not even 20%, but 20 minutes of the film. So the film's 100 minutes, so what's that? Yeah. Who's good at percentages here? I'm not very good at maths. About 20 minutes of the film were reconstructions. So there's a lot less reconstruction than one imagines, I mean, than in the film, but yeah, because we also have then the Bonatti.
Yeah, inevitably, the climbers were filming. When it gets dark, they're not going to carry on filming. Half the film happens in the dark. So, but it's, I'd say 45% at least was archive originated material, interviews and
Yeah.
Anyone else? There's a lady all the way in the back there with the striped shirt. Sure.
I mean, it is one of the more, yeah, sorry, was there any reason given ever why Marco changed his story so many times? The simple answer to that, I think, is really that he took bad advice from publicists. I'm swearing I'm going to get into litigation issues here, but like, purely that, like, so it's as simple as this. If, he came back and somebody said, look, the other guy's dead, the stupid advice. Okay, I'm going to give you I'll couch this as my personal opinion. He gave advice, or he was given advice that would say, tell your story. Do everything you can to big up what you did. The other guy's dead. He's not going to try and recount it. You didn't have to do that, because by the very nature of what Marco did, and it's not under debate by anybody at all, what he did, stop for 3 or 4 hours. I mean, it's quite clear from the photographs what he stopped to do. That in itself was a heroic act beyond, anybody who climbs those mountains would know that. So for him to actually change the stories, and the thing is, if this was a fictional film, Marco would be what you would call an unreliable witness. He's telling his story, and it's just that unfortunately, in the interview process, and I did try really, really, really hard to try and get to the core of everything, but like it would ultimately come back to I can't remember, and that's a difficult place to be in.
It's hard to get a sense of the amount of physical and emotional shock and trauma that is happening, and it's at the very moment that the media was putting him in front of lots of cameras and asking lots of questions, and the response to that. I think in the broader flow of Marco's story, there's the variation that would happen to many of us in that, but pushed a little bit further to one end of the spectrum, perhaps.
Did the folks who went up that day and survived, have they all seen the film? And if so, what was their reaction?
Not everyone, no. I think Wilco's coming here on Sunday, So I'm anticipating that one. He hasn't seen the film yet. Frederick Strang has seen it. I think Eric Meyer, the American climber, he saw it, so he came up to Sundance, saw it there. Annie has seen the film. The family have seen the film. So I'm curious. I will be curious. I mean, Marco. I was hoping for him to see the film in I think it's playing in Trento soon enough. But it's you know, it's a very difficult situation. I can only imagine watching yourself on screen. Is that like, you know, no matter what way you portray somebody, they will always have an opinion as to that's not the way I am really. But it's you know, we strove to be as absolutely as truthful and honest as possible. And no, I mean, the film is without narration. It is without voiceovers. I mean, you know, I think, you know, I'll take from an editorial position, it's impossible not to take the stance. Maybe
also, I don't know about that. Of the stories that remain, of the surviving climbers, their own stories don't tally with each other. Even the climbers that were with each other through the majority of it. And that's perhaps the byproduct of being at 8,000 metres for such a long time, going through such a big thing, and just the nature of being human beings in a failed or failing situation whereby they fill in and see things differently and are, of course, then affected by what happens afterwards and the stories that they read and are reported afterwards. So even within the interviews that we had, they didn't tally up. So I don't know how much it's about our representations as much as we're trying to make sense of something which ultimately the people who are doing it can't really make sense of it.
Yeah, I mean, we started this very. Mark and myself started on this in March of 2003, writing and trying to put a structure on. Mark Monroe, that is the writer, and we put the theme of it was story, because everyone had their stories. So and it was the original catalyst for knowing that there was a film here was that when I interviewed Wilco and I interviewed Pamba, their stories diverged so incredibly differently, and they were climbing side by side. And it wasn't just the slight difference in memory. It's like when somebody says, he says it's okay to go on, but the other guy goes, I said go down. That's quite different, you know.
2 o'clock, it was 4 o'clock. It was, we were going up, we were going down. I mean, it did not tally.
Anyone else? I'm sure the gentleman, yes, the one who you just turn your head around, yes.
Yeah, I thought you conveyed that sort of lack of optional labour really well in the movie to an audience. So you kind of felt as though you were there going through this journey. Odd question, do matineers not have some kind of like cat's eyes material on their rope or screws so they can see where some camp starts?
But here's the thing, right? For the longest time when we were researching this, it all came down to the fact that the ropes had been wiped away. They weren't wiped away, okay? They weren't. That's the point. The only thing that was wiped away was their memories at that point, coming down from the summit in the darkness, right? The ropes, the top line, the top anchor was always where it was from the beginning of the day. I mean, the fundamental questions I think that people always ask, I mean, you know, it's easy to ask at sea level here when we can all kind of think kind of relatively straight. But I remember asking, well, did you not just follow, like, to find the ropes, did you not just follow the big track in the snow that you came up in? And the thing is, you don't think straight. You have to remember at 8,000 meters, you're 1/3 oxygen, and it's equivalent to drinking, I think, 2-3 liters of vodka, I think is what they say in terms of the capacity of the brain. And you're just exhausted, so it's just somebody who's
been on the expedition for
yeah. I mean, they've been there six weeks, you know. Yeah.
They know they're coming up in the darkness, they're going down. It's not at that altitude, a flashing light or something.
But they did. There was a strobe light at Camp 4. So even when there's some of them, as far as I know, I asked Wilco, I think they could see that strobe light from when they were sitting in the bivouac. But all they knew was that, like, somewhere, if we don't find the path right down, we're just going to walk over this. You can see that big ice cliff, and you kind of know that's not something you want to do. So they made that decision to sit there for the night. By the way, which is a really dangerous decision to make because, you know, very few people survive sitting out in the open at 8,300 meters, even on a perfect night.
Anyone else? Sure, this gentleman here.
What reason did Mr. Kim give for not being interviewed?
Did you all hear that back there?
That was what reason did Mr. Kim? I mean, Mr. Kim didn't. What reason did Mr. Kim give not to be interviewed? I mean, you know, I sent several. I had a contact for him, and we just kept saying, and like I had to be from a legal position to be very clear about what we were saying. That like because the Koreans climb with a very different mentality. All Western climbers, no matter what position they find themselves in, will say they're not prepared to lose a finger or a toe to a summit. You know, Wilco lost all his toes. Marco lost all his toes. In the end, so you know how willing or unwilling, that's the question. But the Koreans are prepared to lose a man for the summit. Now that's probably something very controversial to say, but you ask the Sherpas who climb with them. I did a whole. I mean, there's an entire other film to be made out of just the interviews with the Sherpas who climb with the Koreans. Just in terms of, it's a very. I mean, one has to question why would somebody do that to climb to reach a summit on a route that's already been done many times. So, but that's why he didn't want to be interviewed ultimately was just because he thinks that everyone thinks that the Koreans got in the way, and he doesn't see the Western point of view as being valid. He just kind of doesn't understand why everyone thinks they were wrong.
Cultural clash.
So we have time for like 2 more questions. So this gentleman right down front.
Why is it that when there's a dangerous situation, a helicopter rescue can't happen?
Okay. Yeah. The question was, it's a very good question as well. Why, in such a dangerous situation, that a helicopter rescue can't happen? I would argue that's a very good question because the helicopter shots you see in the film, myself and another cameraman, Stephen O'Reilly, he shot half of them, I shot half of them. We got to 7,400 meters, which is Camp 4 level. But there's a big difference between flying to that height and actually being able to land a helicopter anywhere or maneuver a helicopter in any way near there. Those helicopters that the Pakistan military fly, their absolute ceiling is 6'4". By their book. So how we flew to 7'4", I don't know. The weather conspired. It was perfect when we got there that day. It's amazing in its own way, but it made no sense because they were going 6.5, 6'4" is the most they can go. But to actually get in close to a mountain, hover and pick up, there's no place to be able to do that. So the only way you can get down is to get people to at least the base camp or advanced base camp, which is a little higher up, and try and land a helicopter there. But there is no, the weird thing is when you're on the summit, you might as well be on the moon because you are beyond rescue. The only way down is either you're walking down yourself or some very brave souls who will be able to help you down the mountain. Yeah, and that is part of the code. They know that when they go up there, they're making a code that, that they know that if they get stuck, they're on their own. And that's part of that code. It's an unwritten code, and it's an unwritten code for a reason, because, you just know that if you're in trouble, you're on your own.
And our final question, the gentleman in the back there. If you could.
Was there? Do you get a sense of regret from Wilco that, Wilco seems to regret the fact that he didn't try and maybe stop and help the Korean? No, I mean, Wilco. Here's the thing: Wilco did he followed the code, and he's alive today for that reason. Jared didn't, and he had done. In an earlier edit, there was even a third example of what Jared had done on Denali, rescuing people as well. I mean, he consistently put himself in the line of danger, and most climbers will say, "Well, he's reckless." You know what I mean? He's just. And so they won't adhere. They won't think that's the right way to do it. But his moral code just couldn't let him leave somebody behind, as you can see them saying within the movie. I don't think Wilco regrets it. I mean, I think Wilco was angry. I mean, that interview, you have to remember, was done. I mean, Wilco still even had his toes when that interview was filmed. It was really, really soon out. It was 6 weeks after the events. And I could definitely get a sense from him in the interview that he's still kind of questioning, wanting to know answers himself as to what happened.
I'd have to ask him on Sunday.
Yeah, so if anyone's around on Sunday, maybe be able to ask him himself, you know.
So that is all the time we have now. I've been asked to remind you all that the final tube, I guess, is at 12:15. Thank you all so much for coming out, and let's give it up for Nick Ryan.